This podcast is sponsored by Inside Out Group, the specialists in high-risk and challenging filming and time-lapse, covering health and safety videos for rail, construction, and infrastructure projects nationwide.
And we're live. Welcome to this week's Safer Than Your Average. On the show this week, we have Louise. We're very lucky this week to have Louise, as she is the President Elect for IOSH. Louise, if you just want to come in and introduce yourself.
Hi everybody, I'm really excited to be here today. So I've said I'm going to tell you my life story. So is that right?
Yep, pretty much. This is your life. The book's coming out in a minute.
So no, I'm really excited to be here. It's early days as President Elect. I think Jimmy's got me in President Bootcamp at the moment.
He's not got you doing press-ups, has he?
It wouldn't surprise me. It's probably down the line.
Brilliant. So I don't know if you've seen the format of the show. We like to just go right back to the start with our guests and talk about your early life, where you grew up.
Yeah, so these are all things that perhaps people don't know about me. I was actually born in Cambridge in East Anglia, so it's in the east of England. I was born in Mill Road, which anybody who comes from Cambridge, that was the baby factory at the time. So I come from this massive sort of working class family who lived just outside Saffron Walden. I've got hundreds of cousins, so, you know, really big kind of clan. My parents, you know, they had me quite young. They actually won the football pools. They won £400 on the football pools, which meant that they could put money down for a house, which was their first house. When I was 7 or 8, we moved to a little village just outside Cambridge called Stapleford. And that was kind of a big thing for me because this school was quite theatrical. So something folk might not know about me is that as soon as I got to that primary school, they used to do all these plays and performances and things, and I was just completely hooked. And there's actually people that I went to school with in primary school that I'm still at school with who have had professional careers on the stage. One of the guys I was at school with wrote an entire symphony for the Royal Opera House. Wow. In London. So it was, you know, very theatrical, and I was really massively into that. My brother came along a few years later. I guess for me, my sort of family life, if you like, it was very kind of traditional, patriarchal, quite a, you know, I grew up in quite a strict household. So I guess I kind of created, you know, I became resilient, I think. But this whole kind of hard work ethic was sort of built into me. And I think it was very much around, there were kind of expectations for what I would do and where I would go. And so although I had this quite, you know, artistic side of me, I kind of went down a science type route at school. I always worked. So work has always been kind of part of my DNA, if you like. Had various kind of jobs. I went to sixth form in Cambridge. And whilst I was at sixth form, I worked at a hotel, really lovely hotel along the river in Cambridge called the Garden House Hotel. And I loved that job. And my claim to fame is that I have served Stephen Hawking with tea, afternoon tea. Amazing. So yeah, I really, really loved that job. It was great. Again, real kind of artistic sixth form college, so lots of shows and things like that. And I think, you know, coming from Cambridge, people kind of have a perception of what that's like. But something people might not also know about Cambridge is that it's quite a divided city. So, you know, it's very unequal. So there's a big divide between kind of even now, and I think it was so back then, there's a real town and gown type of feel. So even though, you know, I'd kind of got myself through to a sixth form education, there wasn't an expectation that I would go on to university. So nobody in my family had ever been to university or tertiary education. And I have been around a bit, Blair. So even back then, you know, only 10% of, you know, the population went on to university. And I think growing up in Cambridge, you have a vision of what university's like that actually isn't quite real. But it, you know, it is a great place to grow up. And I had one of my very close friends, also called Louise. We were the two Louises. I think her family sort of made it, you know, they really supported me as well, and they sort of helped me to realize that it would be possible to go on and you know, go on beyond A levels, if you like. And I think for me, I kind of needed to get away from home, from that environment as well. So it's kind of what drove me to sort of study, and it's something that I you know, I go out and give talks in schools about the fact that you can actually progress through education. And I, you know, it's definitely a message that I want to really put out there. So
yeah, definitely, and it's an excellent message to put out there.
But I didn't know what I was going to do. So it's, you know, I knew that I wanted to carry on with my education, but I didn't really know what that was going to be. And I remember having, you know, if I could have gone to drama school, that would have been my perfect thing, but that was not going to happen. And I remember thinking I'd really like to work with businesses and make businesses work smarter. That was kind of something that I had in the back of my head. But we had something in sixth form, and I've spoken to people of my era who kind of remember this, you know, with their careers advice. It was something called Cascade. So it was literally, you would plug your A-level subjects into this, you know, computer program. I can't even remember how we did it now. And you put your interests in, you asked, it had personality questions, those kind of things. And I really wanted it to tell me that I was going to go, you know, into the theatre somewhere. But you'll never guess what the number one thing was at the top, Blair. There were 100 jobs on this thing.
What was it?
Health and Safety Officer.
Brilliant.
It was literally like a computer readout with like perforated lines down the side, and there were literally 100 jobs on there.
Yeah.
And I looked at it and thought, oh no, I don't want to do that. And I was like, oh, and I was looking at this thing thinking, how did it generate that? But you know, there was obviously a lot of stuff on there, and I remember looking at kind of the top 10. And I did sort of work experience. So I went to Addenbrooke's Hospital, a huge hospital in Cambridge. So I did a day with the radiography department, and I did all of these things. And I kept on coming back to number one, health and safety at the top. And I kind of did a bit more research around it and looked into environmental health. So I did some, you know, I rang up the local council and said, can I come and have a look at what an EHO does, an environmental health officer does? And I absolutely loved it. So that's kind of the route that I took. So I went to Nottingham Trent. It was Trent Polytechnic when I started it, finished as Nottingham Trent University. And that was amazing because it was going to, you know, a completely different type of city. And it was an amazing course. So, you know, environmental health officers cover a whole range of topics, really. And it's something that I still fall back on now. And I remember in the first week of our lectures, the lecturer actually saying to us that, you know, in history, the improvements that we've made around public health, safe food, safe places to work, good housing, pollution control, all of those kind of things have saved more lives than any medical breakthrough. And I think when you think about where we are now, that's, you know, that couldn't be more poignant in terms of, you know, what we're all doing in our roles. So, you know, from my perspective, that kind of, you know, I still pull on all sorts of aspects of my foundation, if you like.
And it's a great foundation as well. I remember from my time studying at the University of the West of Scotland, the health and safety and the environmental health programmes are merged. So a lot of the core modules are the same, and you studied with a lot of the environmental health students. And I wouldn't have got through some of the science-based stuff that we had to learn if we hadn't had the environmental health students coming fresh out of school that had that A-level chemistry.
That's what I did.
Teach me all the kind of theoretical chemistry that I was really struggling with. I managed to get through it all right in the end, but yeah, it was great having that crossover. And I really enjoyed some of the environmental health law side of things that we learned about public health and about food safety and stuff like that as well. It really factors in, it gives you that broad knowledge for operating in industry. And it's quite interesting off of the back of the environmental health degree that you can do at the University of the West of Scotland. You can also qualify for graduate IOSH membership as well.
Oh, brilliant.
It's a dual qualification. But, it's a fantastic course.
So yeah, I mean, that, you know, that is definitely my foundation. It's something I'm really proud of. So I kind of studied, got through that course. I actually, my first job as an environmental health officer, so I was a food safety and health and safety enforcement officer. And I actually I felt like I could go anywhere after that. I honestly felt like I could go anywhere, but I went back to Cambridge. But it was only kind of, I needed to go back to kind of find my feet to continue on. And actually, as a local authority, Cambridge City Council, you know, it's still a really forward-thinking local authority. So it was a really good place to go. And I had this kind of, I still had a really strong work ethic, and I did well. And I mean, I remember, you know, even though I was young, you know, I would take, this is what I say to our future leaders as well, you know, I would, you know, I was in court several times. I mean, I remember being cross-examined in the dock for 3 hours straight. I'm sure that they would give you a break these days. And the solicitor that was, you know, questioning me was saying, well, you know, what on earth can you know about this case? You're so young. And he just picked the wrong person, because I was literally 5 minutes out of college and I had every single code of practice memorized and just wiped the floor with everything. So, you know, all of my best, you know, I've got some really good stories from those days. And they were, you know, very supportive environment to work within. But I ended up, one of the prosecutions that I took was against the co-op. And they ended up hiring me because I think they thought it was cheaper to get me off the streets.
Brilliant.
So my next job after that, which I knew that you know, it was this feeling of I needed to just find my feet straight out of college. I actually moved to the West Country, so I lived in Taunton in Somerset.
Lovely part of the world.
Yeah, and I worked for the co-op, and I was still only in my early 20s. And that's when my job kind of switched from being, you know, at the local authority, it had been mostly food safety with a bit of health and safety, and it very much switched then. I was much more health and safety orientated, but I covered a massive region. it's when the 6-pack came out. So the work equipment regs, manual handling regs, all of those came out around that time. And that's when we had to start doing risk assessment. So I remember one of my first projects that they gave me was, off you go, do the manual handling assessments for the whole of the non-food division.
Where do you start with that one?
I know. So I remember going to this huge store in, like, I worked in South Wales, so part of my region was South Wales, and just, that was, I think, what I said to myself, where do we start? But again, it's that whole thing of I was used to asking questions, I was really probing, and nobody knew how to do the risk assessments, and we all had the same code of practice, and we all had to kind of work it out. And I don't think my age really came into it, because I was prepared to stop and ask questions and go through all of these things. So that's why I'm a big advocate for saying, we need to have everybody in the mix, and it doesn't matter what age you are. If you're willing to put the hours and the time in and ask questions, you can do these things.
Yeah, I still see that sometimes, and when I've been going for roles myself, that I walk in the door and they're like, is your dad with you? And I'm no spring chicken myself these days, but they're used to the health and safety person being the old grey head.
Yeah.
That perception's now thankfully starting to change a little bit. There is the people that have got a huge amount of experience, and I had one of them on the podcast just a short couple of weeks ago, Jim Tassel, who was a factories inspector way back in the day before the HSE existed, and then transitioned over to the HSE, and they've got an absolute dearth of experience, these people. It's great. You can take them for breakfast and catch up with them and get all of the war stories of a 40-year career and get all of the understanding of that, and it's stood me in good stead doing that. So that's interesting as well.
So, and but what I really got into, I loved doing store redevelopments. And so, and they still do this, any retailer they'll take their stores and they'll change them around and move them around. And I got really into this. So, and I used to look at the plans and knowing how that store would work and how it would be organized and how the people inside it would work. I would literally look at this plan and say, right, we need to change it here and here from a food safety perspective, a health and safety perspective, and also looking at it in terms of nuisance and are we going to cause a noise issue here in this store? So and I really got into that. I absolutely loved it. So that kind of led me to CDM was fairly new, so that was coming through then. So basically I moved into construction after that. So I left the co-op and I was basically working as then a planning supervisor, so involved with the whole CDM process. And CDM is still one of my favorite topics to talk about.
Brilliant.
So that's kind of where it took me after that. And I used to so I was the consultancy I worked with used to do all the redevelopments for Wetherspoon pubs. So I built loads of Wetherspoon pubs. It's great. So did that all over the country. Then I had a brief stint for quite a big consultancy practice, again pure health and safety, and I was seconded to Savills, which everyone knows Savills is the posh property people, but they actually do quite a lot more than that.
They do a lot of facilities management, don't they?
So I was seconded to them, and I just kind of had a special project, and they started saying to me, you'd do really well if you came here. And I was like, I've only just started this other job, I can't just leave it. But they had a new director in the commercial property department at that time, And she had actually created, a lady called Sally, she'd created her own business within Glasgow. So she'd built up a business herself from scratch, and that had then been merged into the Savills portfolio. And she was just amazing. She, you know, incredible business lady, who knew how to turn something around. And you know, I was very much part of that team, you know, really sort of evolving the whole commercial property arm within Savills. And she was an incredible mentor. I'd say she's probably the best line manager that I've ever had, but she knew nothing about health and safety. So, you know, she taught me an awful lot about business. Savills is highly competitive, very, very commercial. They'd never had a health and safety professional in the team before. And I had to make some quite tough decisions that didn't always go down particularly well. But, you know, we built these new foundations, and I think, you know, my role kind of developed there. And I found myself getting involved with other parts of the business as well. So it was amazing. And I always have to talk about asbestos in these things. So around that time, the asbestos requirements were changing. That's when we had, you know, so we had this massive portfolio of property. And that was when we had to then identify where our asbestos was and manage it for the first time. So there was actually a group of us who came together as property professionals. So there was Alison Connick from CBRE, you know, there's people from JLL, a lot of the big property companies. We actually came together at that time. And the HSC came to us and talked to us about these new regulations that were going to come through. And it was actually as a result of that group that they looked at the tenant-landlord relationship, and that hadn't really been thought through prior to that. And that actually appeared in the completed regulations. So, you know, so we there was a lot of work where we were trying to do stuff together as well in terms of property. So yeah, and it was very much, that was kind of, you know, I was still only in my early 30s, but it was very much, you know, this kind of big health and safety role. And it was what I had kind of aspired to do, you know? And I think even now it's, well, when you've got a role that's ahead of, you've kind of made it, I guess. There's still that kind of piece in health and safety. But I think for me, I, you know, got to that point, and then I was working across the business. So Savills have got, you know, they manage rural property. They have got lovely estate agents, they've got offices, that kind of thing. But I kind of took that job and took that role to where I could personally take it. And I think after that, I kind of had this feeling, well, actually, these big corporates, these big companies, they can do with their, you know, for them, they can do to a certain extent what they need to do. Whereas I was really conscious that there's lots of smaller companies out there, and certainly public sector organisations that I felt, you know, needed something different. And so that's when I kind of left this big, lovely corporate job to set up my own business. Complete madness at the time.
It's quite interesting. A friend of mine that I've not previously mentioned on the podcast, a guy called John Richardson, who's a really good safety professional in the rail industry, always used to say to me, it's great working for all the big organisations and the job security and all that goes with it, but if you want to make a real difference, go to one of the SMEs or a few of the SMEs,
Yeah.
help them, and you'll see the tangible change building through.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that was great advice. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of I mean, people always say, if, you know, I heard the saying, if people knew how difficult it was to run your own business, you would never do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what I tell everybody.
So tell us a little bit more about it then. Who was your first client?
So I mean, it was a big change. So I'd had this massive corporate job. Lots of people knew me, you know, when it came to commercial property, I knew what I was doing. You know, my phone would be constantly ringing, I'd be constantly solving problems. And then the next day I had nothing. And all of these people that are sort of saying, oh, you know, we'll throw you some work or whatever, it just doesn't work like that. And I ended up, I ended up going through an agency to get some work to start off with. Because I was picking up sort of little bits and pieces, but not enough really. And one of my first big projects was working for the London Borough of Hillingdon. So I was working for the Director of Education and I helped them look at the programme for their health and safety in their primary schools, which was really fantastic.
Yeah.
And I kind of realised then that actually I was having to fire on more cylinders than I had been with a kind of team. I think at Savills I was kind of getting stuck in the office quite a lot. Yeah. So it was kind of good to be out. And then at the same time, Sally, who'd seconded me into Savills, she'd kind of moved on, and I did start to pick up some commercial property work then, which has kind of been, you know, that's what I love doing. I do like doing that. But then we had the big property crash.
Yeah, 2008.
Yeah, so that was a really challenging time because I kind of had all my eggs in one basket to a certain extent. And so since then I've, you know, diversified. I work with all sorts of different types of people. We're very much, you know, we are a health and safety consultancy, but we talk about customers. And, you know, I don't just see myself as a health and safety professional, I'm a business owner as well. So, you know, it is very much around that. I work with a school now in North London, which, you know, has been amazing because we kind of got stuck with them, and we've been talking to the pupils there about health and safety. You know, and I've talked to them about my journey as well, because for me, you know, sticking to education, I always tell them it's a real marathon. It kind of gave me the foundation and the pieces that I need to really move on. And I've got this real sense of kind of fairness and respect. So, you know, the way that I run my business, we're quite an agile team. There's a lot of part-time work, you know, we promote part-time working because for me that shouldn't be part of a career. So yeah, so that's kind of my, you know, kind of brings me up to where I am now, I guess.
Yep. But we've not mentioned your IOSH journey yet.
Yeah, so
let's touch on that a little bit.
So the IOSH journey is quite an interesting one as well. So I mean, bearing in mind that, you know, I'd been kind of doing health and safety from the start, and so I was naturally a member of the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, and I still am. I joined IOSH in 1999. So I think that was, I wasn't quite at Savills then, but I just felt like I kind of needed that kind of, the CIEH weren't really doing as much health and safety, so it kind of went down that route. I became chartered in 2008, and Ray Hurst, do you know Ray Hurst? He's on council. So Ray Hurst signed my chartered certificate. And I've always lived, so I live in St Albans, and Chiltern has always been my branch.
Yep.
So
I might talk a little bit about the branch. They're doing amazing things. I think
know.
you guys are just every bit as active as we are. You've got an event on every other week, and it's fantastic.
It is.
You've also got my good friend Natasha there giving you a hand now as well. Natasha's amazing. Yeah.
So I kept on going back to the branch because, and I remember especially when I was at Savills, because quite often we can be the only person with our skill set, you know, and I'm working in this big company with a lot of responsibility. And I just thought, do you know what? Sometimes it just would be really nice to talk to someone else. And I kept going back there and like not quite feeling the love, you know. And I kept going back and went to odd sessions. And then I guess it was probably about 6 or 7 years ago now, I went back, and it's always been in the same hotel. And there was this massive room, and there's 10 retired members in this room. I don't think there are any women in there at all. And I just looked and I thought, we have to do something here. I just thought, and it may as well be me that, you know, takes it on this journey. So basically I became vice chair initially, and it's just progressed, you know, it's just become this really vibrant hub of, you know, support, and, you know, where people, you know, would walk through the door and, you know, there would always be a friendly face. And, you know, I've talked about, you know, I definitely feminized it. But, you know, I think that's kind of good for everybody. It was, you know, just really welcoming, you know, just injecting some energy into it, and just, you know, really trying to enable other people to be creative in terms of the way they do things. And I think, you know, this year we definitely have knocked it out the park. So I think we were the first branch to do a meeting on Zoom, and we had the guys from Singapore on there as well. And I mean, the whole of the networks, it's been amazing, hasn't it, this year? So
it's been fantastic. I think the pandemic has brought so much change. It brought this podcast kind of out of left field. It gave me the time to focus on it, being stuck at home and thinking, right, okay, we've got the evening now. I can get a little bit of extra work done and jump into that. So I used kind of my commuting time at night to try and gain some work time back, and that led into this. It's been fantastic, some of the meetings that we've ran across all of the branches as well. And you mentioned as well, as part of the face-to-face, that you always have a friendly face at Chiltern. I've found that with a lot of the different branches. I was always travelling in my previous role for work, and I found myself in London quite a lot. I went along to a couple of the Metropolitan branch meetings, introduced myself there, made some great contacts, and I've had some of the people from that branch on the podcast as well. So it's fantastic. It's great to have that international network. I'm looking forward, in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be speaking in the IOSH Qatar branch.
Oh, brilliant.
And I would have never got to do that before had this not happened. So I'm trying to take the positives out of it and really use them to my advantage.
Yeah, so I did all of that, and I guess it's this whole, you know, I'm definitely somebody who will bring teams of people. I can bring teams of people. Give me any team of people, and I can make things happen. You know, I mean, in terms of my work now, most of the people that we work with are businesses that, you know, when we start with them, they've got hardly anything. And we make health and safety does not need to be boring. So it's very much, you know, I bring that kind of business side that I have within myself bit of theatrical stuff, I guess, talking about it.
Putting a good bit of energy behind it.
And
Excellent.
it's just, it is this creative thing. So yeah, I think, I definitely put that into the whole Chiltern piece, really.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day I don't know whether I was getting ready for a branch meeting, but I was flicking through and I thought, I could apply for vice president.
Brilliant.
I thought, well, I'll give it a shot, and I might not get it this year, but I might get it next year. Well, I only went and got it.
Excellent.
Which I definitely wasn't expecting. And it was the same year that Jimmy became vice president as well. But I came third in that piece. So I took the remainder of Vincent's term. So I only had a year. So the following year I ran again and got a full term. And then, of course, this year I've, run for President Elect, which has been amazing. And difficult and challenging, quite rightly. And here I am as President Elect.
Brilliant. And we're looking forward to your tenure. We're also looking forward to Jimmy's tenure now that he's the president for this year. So that's going to be fantastic. So where do you see yourself progressing to in the future? There's a lot of big things coming, a lot of previous successes as well. What's next for you, Louise?
So, I mean, in terms of, my future, because I listened to Jimmy's podcast and what he said, I think the thing for me is, so Karen McDonnell, who's the last female president that we had, her and I talked about this, because I'll be president next year and what I would do afterwards. And with that, I mean, obviously, my business will sort of keep running. I think my plan is, I can see myself being on council probably for another term after that, just to help and support, because she's been a massive support for me, which I'm really grateful for. So I can sort of see myself, carrying on with council, but I'd quite like to go into politics, Blair.
Excellent. Okay.
So it's kind of, taking, all of these things that we have, you go through these positions, even from a volunteer perspective, it's really good experience for other things. So, I'm quite interested in going into sort of local politics, and who knows what might happen after that.
Excellent. So we could see you as an MP in the House of Commons.
Well, you never know.
Brilliant. That's absolutely fantastic. And a world exclusive for the Safer Than Your Average podcast as well. Watch this space. You also mentioned Karen McDonnell there. Karen is an absolute credit to the health and safety industry. She is an amazing person. She's been such a fantastic mentor to me over the years, and she's a great sounding board for advice as well. So I really value Karen's friendship, and I'm proud to call her a friend. She's a fantastic person. Moving on a little bit then, Louise, if we look at what advice or guidance you would give to someone starting out, maybe as a first career in health and safety.
Well, I think, don't let your, I certainly did not let my age hold me back at all. So it's, I think take your time to learn about all aspects of wherever you're working, definitely. I'd say there's a lady called Helen Tupper who I heard talk about squiggly careers. And I think where we are now is, you can't always expect to kind of start in an organisation and work, that kind of doesn't happen in health and safety. And I think what's benefited me is that I've had quite a broad exposure to lots of different types of health and safety. I think about your, I don't like calling them soft skills, I call them power skills. And think about the language that we're using so that you talk about what good looks like, and if you can infuse people, you kind of take people with you. I'd say learn about organizational psychology as well, and about people. have a really good presence on LinkedIn. So I think ever since I had my vice president's role, I tried to create that kind of community as well on LinkedIn, which we all have now. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And that's, people often say to me, how do you get all of these people on your podcast? And I said, I messaged half of them on LinkedIn and said, do you want to be on my podcast? Some say, no, go away. Some say, oh, I'd love to, that'd be excellent, So if you don't put yourself out there, that network's there to be used.
Absolutely.
I think it's a fantastic resource, an excellent network to be able to build up and get to talk to people in the key influential positions.
So I think, LinkedIn these days is just amazing. I think it's about being humble. I think it's about treating others with respect.
Mm-hmm.
It's staying curious,
Yeah.
But I do believe, and I know that, there are a few other of us that are first careerers, but, bearing in mind that I was ahead of in my early 30s because I'd started early. So, I was talking to somebody the other day and saying, well, I've got nearly 3 decades in health and safety.
Yeah.
And, that means that you can go, I've got another at least 10, 15 years of work. So, that's that level of experience kind of builds up over time. So, I just say, go for it and don't let your age put you off.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent. That's great advice. Thank you so much for coming on the Safer Than Your Average podcast, Louise. I really appreciate it. And we're looking forward to your tenure as president. Good luck for it and all the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This podcast is sponsored by Inside Out Group, the specialists in high-risk and challenging filming and time-lapse, covering health and safety videos for rail, construction, and infrastructure projects nationwide.